Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a true crime video. I know that I'm like so spotty with my uploads, but I'm having a really hard time recording at the moment because everyone is home and it's been pretty sunny out lately, so a lot of the kids are playing outside and it's super loud during the day, so I'm just trying to record really late at night. It's 11:30 at the moment, which, like, usually I'm in bed by now. I don't really want to record this late usually, but I kind of have to now, so that's a little bit easier on a weekend than on a weeknight. So anyway, let's get into today's video. Today we're going to be talking about the case of Nancy Moyer. So Nancy Moyer was 36 years old when she went missing on March 6th, 2009 from Tenino in Washington. She had two young daughters. I believe they were 10 and 8 or thereabouts, and she had a husband whom she was separated from. She was originally from Olympia, Washington, and she was described as like this really fun person, like, you know, really well liked by everyone, would talk to absolutely every person. When she was in college, she took an internship with a local agricultural company, and it is there that she met Bill Moyer. The two started dating, and shortly after college, they got married. Nancy then got a job working as a financial analyst in the State Department of Ecology in Lacey, Washington. That's a mouthful. And a year after her and Bill got married, they had their first daughter, very soon followed by their second. So they had two children quite early on in their marriage. After a few years, Nancy started feeling unhappy. She had started dating Bill in college, got married soon after, had kids very quickly, and she felt like she missed out on a lot of things that young people normally do. She didn't really get a chance to travel. She didn't really get a chance to date. She kind of just felt like she missed out a lot. So after 10 years of marriage, her and Bill separated. However, they remained really good friends. The split was completely amicable. Bill got the kids every Friday and Saturday night, and Nancy had them during the week. So basically, Nancy took that opportunity of her weekends to go out with friends and meet new people, get a little bit, familiar with the dating scene. She had a lot of, colleagues at work that she was really good friends with. So she, hung out with them a lot. Then on Friday, March 6th of 2009, the day began like any other day. She went to work, had a really good day at work, and then on her way home, she carpooled with her colleague Matthew and dropped him off at his house. Matthew was like a brother to her, and they carpooled every day. She had told Matthew that she was really looking forward to a quiet few nights. She wasn't planning to go out that weekend. She was just going to kick up her feet and relax. She picked up a bottle of wine in a local convenience store on her way home, and then she cracked it open, had a glass of wine, and did exactly that, just relaxed. Because she wasn't planning to go out and meet anyone, no one was expecting to hear from her that weekend, and no one did because Nancy vanished. On Sunday night, Bill arrived at Nancy's house to drop off their daughters, and the front door was partially open and the TV was still playing. He thought that maybe she had decided to go out for a walk on one of the trails behind her house and had forgotten to close the door. So he called her cell phone, but then he discovered that her purse her cell phone and her wallet were all still in the house, as well as her keys. And this kind of alarmed him because she never went anywhere without them. Even if she was just going for a walk, she would at least always have her keys and her cell phone with her. But Bill decided to just take the kids home with him. And then he started calling her family and friends to see if anyone had seen her. But no one had, because again, she wasn't planning to meet anyone that weekend. So Bill thought maybe she just needed some time for herself. Maybe she decided to unplug from everything and she just kind of lost track of time, or she just maybe wasn't feeling up to having the kids home yet, and he just left it alone. He gave her some space. But then on Monday, she didn't show up for work, and that's kind of when Bill really panicked. I always find that strange, that when people don't show up for work, that's when they think something's wrong. But someone not being home for her kids to be dropped off is not a red flag. Like, I would think that she would want to be home for her kids more than she would want to show up for work. If she decided to take a break from her life, she isn't going to show up for work either. But regardless, that panicked Bill and her coworkers too. They thought it was not normal that she didn't show up for work. So Bill called the police and reported her missing. Police immediately put out a be on the lookout for Nancy. They interviewed her neighbors, and one neighbor said that on Friday night he heard Nancy's car, and then he heard Nancy say to someone, "Hurry, let's go." But none of the he didn't think anything of it. He thought she was talking to her daughters, so he didn't look or anything like that. And none of the other neighbors heard anything. Police also searched her house, but could not find anything missing or any signs of a crime happening. They did, however, find a few strange things. They found 2 glasses of wine on the table, which is odd because Nancy said she wasn't expecting company. And 1 glass was used, but 1 glass was not used. Like, it was a perfectly clean glass. And they found a set of fingerprints on both glasses, but they all belonged to Nancy. So that's a little bit odd, and I'll come back to it later because it's never really explained. They also listened to the messages on her answering machine, and she had gotten a few messages from a guy who only called himself Jim. And he talked about taking Nancy out on a date on Saturday night. Police believe that the door was left open when Nancy went missing. So in order to determine when exactly during the weekend Nancy went missing, they actually did something really smart. They requested her electricity bill because it was really cold outside at the time. They looked at her bill or her usage and found that there was a huge spike between 11:30 and 12 on Friday night, indicating that that's when the door had been left open and her heating had to work a lot harder to keep the house warm. So they determined that Nancy went missing around that time. Investigators then started taking a closer look at Nancy and her life. They looked at her financial records and found that she was almost $50,000 in debt. They were wondering if she left on her own accord and decided to just start a new life away from all her debt. And again, she wasn't happy with, being a wife and a mother, or at least having missed out on a lot of things in her life, so it's not unthinkable. But they checked everything, and she hadn't taken out any large amounts of money in months, like just regular amounts to buy regular things. If she left, she would have had no money to live off, and her credit cards and debit cards have not been used since she went missing. And also, from everything they heard about her, she would not leave her daughters behind. So they then decided to start looking at the people closest to her. And of course, the first person they always look at is the partner. So they looked at Bill. But Bill was completely cooperative, answered all their questions. When he was asked to take a polygraph test, he did it without hesitation and passed. So police cleared him quite quickly as a suspect, not to mention he was with his daughters all weekend and they could vouch for that. They also looked at Matthew, the guy, like the colleague that she dropped off, but quickly discovered that he was with his wife and kid all Friday night, and there was also nothing to indicate that he would harm Nancy. Police then wanted to look at a few other people in Nancy's life, but found that there was a whole part of her life that she was keeping private. Like, everyone knew that she went to bars and, was socializing and meeting people, but she didn't tell anyone in her life who those people were. Her coworkers or her family didn't know anyone that she was dating or didn't know anyone that she had met. Yeah, she went out with her coworkers frequently, but she also went out without them, and nobody knew who these people were that she was meeting on her nights out. It was very important for her that her daughters were not impacted by her dating life, so she never brought a man home. She wanted to keep that completely separate from her home life. They eventually did manage to track down Jim. So they interviewed a bunch of her coworkers, and there was a man that stood out to them because he was acting very fidgety and very anxious the whole time. And his name was Jim Roth. He admitted that he was the Jim who left the messages on her answering machine. He said that he and Nancy had been on a few dates over the past few weeks. And when police asked him where he was on Friday night, he said that he had recently separated from his wife and that his 2 sons were staying with him that Friday night. However, police wanted to interview his sons to ask him if that was true, but they needed consent from both children's parents, and their mother would not give consent for the police to question her sons, so they were not able to verify his alibi. Jim also confessed to driving by Nancy's house on Saturday night because he was worried that she never called him back. And then he noticed that the door was open and let himself into the house. But Nancy wasn't there. A lot of people find this piece of information super sketchy because police asked him if his fingerprints or DNA could be in the house, and he said, well, yes, if I touched a doorknob, but I'm not sure. But it's very convenient for him to say that he let himself into the house, because then if his DNA or fingerprints are found in the house, he could be like, well, yeah, I was there. But Nancy had never let him into her house while they were dating. Why would he think that she would be okay with him just going into her house uninvited? Police obviously found this very suspicious. They asked him to take a polygraph test, which he agreed to, but he was so anxious that he was failing even basic questions. These aren't specific, but questions like, is your name Phil? Do you work in for this company? Something like that. He would say yes, and the machine would show it failing. He was so anxious that his results were all over the place, and the technician said that there was no way to tell if he was lying or telling the truth, and his results were inconclusive. So they didn't find any of his DNA or fingerprints at Nancy's house, and then with the results being inconclusive, they had to release him as a suspect, and they were really at a dead end at this point. In August of 2010, there was a man in the area that Nancy lived who approached approached a police officer and said that there was a man driving behind in a truck with very erratic behavior, and the man asked him if he could help him bury a body. As he was speaking to police, the truck drove past, so the police officer followed him and after a while managed to pull him over. And the man who was driving the truck was 27-year-old Bernard Howell. Next to Bernard in the cabin of his truck was the body of a 60-year-old woman wrapped in a blanket, and she was just sitting propped up next to him in the cabin. Bernard told police that he had found her lying on the side of a walking trail, dead, and that he decided to give her a proper burial so that her family wouldn't have to bear the cost of her funeral. Which, of course, nobody believed. So, police didn't believe his story either and took him into custody. He was eventually sentenced for this murder to 26 years in prison. But since this happened in the area that Nancy went missing the year before, they looked more into Bernard's past or background. They found out that he was a door-to-door meat salesman, which that has to be something that only exists in the US. It sounds so sketchy to me. I've never known anyone to sell meat at the door. But yeah, he was living with his father. His father lived in Nancy's neighborhood, and he did sell to the houses around there. He claimed multiple times that he'd never seen Nancy before, but police found meat that he sold in Nancy's freezer. So they brought in Nancy's daughters. They asked him if anyone ever came to the door to sell something, and his daughter said yes. There was a man who came to the door to sell, like my mom bought meat from him. So they lined up a number of photos for the girls to look at, and they very clearly identified Bernard as the man who sold their mom meat. So he clearly was at their house. Do I think he was lying? Yes, but I don't think it's that hard to believe that he really didn't know who she was, because if that's your job and you're selling at multiple houses to a lot of different people, you're not going to remember everyone's face. However, the police had no further evidence, and they couldn't tie him to Nancy's disappearance other than the fact that he sold her meat. They couldn't prove that, they didn't find any evidence of him being in her house. So they ultimately couldn't tie him to her disappearance. So again, nothing came of this suspect. Then in 2012, a new investigator took over the case and wanted to start the investigation again from scratch. He went back to interview Jim. Jim had actually changed his story about a few things. Some of the details about his relationship with Nancy had changed, and also he initially claimed that he went to her house on Saturday night and that he was home Friday night with his sons. But he now said that he actually went to her house Friday night. I find that really strange, okay, because he obviously knew that she disappeared on Friday night. He had been questioned by police before. That's why they asked for his alibi between 11:30 and 12. That is the very end of Friday night. So if he went to her house on Friday night, she would have either been there or he would have been there right at the moment she disappeared, essentially putting himself at the scene when she disappeared. So I don't know. I would find it logical that he would change his story in the reverse direction. That if he initially said he went on Friday night, that he now changed it to Saturday night. But he actually changed it in such a way that makes him look more suspicious, which I do not understand. When police asked him if he knew where Nancy's body was, would he tell them? He chuckled and said no. Again, that's kind of like chuckling is kind of suspicious in this kind of situation. But again, police didn't have enough evidence and had to let him go. And then unfortunately, Jim died of natural causes in 2017. He always maintained that he had nothing to do with her disappearance. But a lot of people believe that he did. In 2019, another coworker of Nancy, a man named Eric Roberts, came forward and confessed to killing her. He lived 3 houses down from Nancy at the time of her disappearance. He was one of the colleagues that police interviewed back in 2010, but he was not a suspect. But out of the blue, he contacted police in 2019 and confessed to killing her. He changed his story a couple of times. He eventually completely recanted it. He had a lot of mental issues at the time. He was taking a lot of medication, and police ultimately concluded that it was highly unlikely that he actually was involved, and they let him go. At some point, he didn't even remember to confessing to this. They did do an investigation of Robert's property, and where he initially claimed that he killed Nancy, but they were never able to find her or any indication that he had actually done something to her, so they ultimately let him go. So that is it in this case. She was never found. I think that one of 3 things happened. This is just my personal theories. I don't think it's that implausible that she walked out on her own life. I know that very often people with kids are not considered to do that because how could they leave behind their kids? But I've also known a lot of parents to be extremely stressed out, and I don't think it's that unthinkable, especially given that she kind of changed over the years. She literally walked out on her marriage because she wanted to relive her youth. That's essentially what, I'm sure there were deeper problems, but that's essentially what happened. So I don't think it's unthinkable that she just decided to give it all up and leave. But I do find it a little bit strange that she would leave the door open and the TV on. Like, those are little details that I find strange. Those are definitely details that indicate to me that something very unexpected happened and she had no time to react. So I do think it's unlikely, but I would not rule it out in this case. Then there's either Jim did it or Bernard did it. I don't think it's that strange to think that Bernard did it because he killed someone else, and then he also sold meat at her house. He knew exactly where she lived. There's 2 things that make him, to me, a less likely suspect. One, he was clearly panicked when he had that dead woman in his car. He even asked a random stranger if he could help him bury a body. To me, that indicates that that was the first time he ever did something like that. I don't think he would meticulously have killed Nancy a year before, dispose of her body in such a way that nobody ever found her, and then completely panic a year later when he does it again. I just don't think that. I think that was the first time he killed someone. And also, whoever took her would have had to know that she was home alone on Friday, would have had to know that her husband had the kids Friday and Saturday, and that she was not planning to go out that night. He didn't know her. When he sold meat to her, I keep saying that, I think it's such a weird thing. When he sold meat to her, her daughters were home. So he, not knowing her, I'm guessing would have just assumed that she lived there with her family. So unless he was watching her for weeks at least, he wouldn't have known that she was home alone. So I think that makes him less likely of a suspect. And then the third thing is that Jim did it, and I do believe that the most. Unfortunately, because he died, they were never able to prove that or pin it on him. Nancy's family believes that Jim did it. Most likely scenario is that she rejected him. His initial story, I didn't really want to go into detail on it, but I might as well. His initial story is that they were never intimate. They tried, but he couldn't perform. And then afterwards, when police questioned him again years later, he changed that detail and said that they were intimate. My guess is that it was probably the first story, and that he was embarrassed and maybe went to her house to, try something, and that she rejected him. Maybe not even because she didn't want to, maybe because she was genuinely looking forward to a weekend by herself, and she could have just said to him, not this weekend, like, you're not coming in, I just want to be alone, and that he snapped. The only thing, and I said I'd come back to this, that I do not know what happened there is the 2 wine glasses, because a second glass would indicate that she was expecting someone. So if she was expecting Jim, it would be kind of weird that she wouldn't have let him in. And the glass had not been used, so whoever it was for had either not gotten to the house or had not gotten far enough that they would have had a drink. So I don't know where the second glass comes into it. Like I said, I believe that Jim did it, most likely because she rejected him. The fact that the door was open would indicate that she either ran away from someone or that someone took her at the door. And I don't think anyone ever made it into her house. I just wonder who that second wine glass was for and why so late on a Friday that person had not gotten there. Let me know your thoughts on that. I'd love to hear any other theories, because I'm kind of at a loss with that wine glass. It's like a detail that's stuck in my mind that I just don't know where it comes into the story. But yeah, it's now been 11 years since she went missing, and she's never been found. I feel really bad, particularly for her kids. They were very young when this happened. They grew up without a mother, and more importantly, they grew up never knowing what happened to their mother, and I find that heartbreaking. So yeah, that's everything for this case. Thank you so much, as always, for watching, and I'll see you in my next